Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the sale of the Cheshire Cheese Company into private hands in the EU in order to secure its future in our post-Brexit Britain, as well as all the obvious discussion points related to it, including how it's possible to work on a better deal outside of the single market, and why would we even try. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So since leaving the customs union single market, we've seen a lot of articles about how British businesses have struggled, but there were two more involved than most in explaining publicly what the issues were. Daniel Lambert Wines, Cheshire Cheese Company. Lambert finally moved to France earlier this year in order to cope with our third country status out of the single market. Now the Cheshire Cheese Company has been sold to a larger business based in the EU in order to reclaim lost EU sales. The problem for the wine company was just horrendously complex red tape, like it is for a lot of businesses. They could still trade, but it was incredibly complex, time-consuming, expensive. According to Daniel Lambert, I think one of his main beefs was it wasn't even a necessary consequence of Brexit. Being a third country always going to mean much more work. It's a massive headache for him. But it's like the government just kept making the system unnecessarily unwieldy, like adding extra red tape on top. But the problem for the Cheshire Cheese Company was much simpler in many ways. They sold small consignments of cheese to customers in Britain, in other countries around Europe. But selling to the single market from outside means standards controls in the form of a health certificate. You need a health certificate. But if you're selling £30 worth of cheese to a customer, but you need an £80 health certificate every time you do so, you're not selling that cheese. So it wasn't a case of a difficult or time-consuming red tape. Just the expense meant that EU customers were just lost overnight. You could not supply them overnight. It wasn't a gradual winding down. There was no viable way around this other than to move the operations to the EU. And that's what the UK government advised at the start of last year. Businesses would contact their helpline to ask how they're supposed to keep selling to Europe. And the report suggested the invariable response was set up a warehouse in an EU country, move a load of stock there at once, and then distribute it to individual EU customers from there. This is what is effectively happening with the Cheshire Cheese Company now. So it's been bought by someone with a large presence in the EU, a larger business. The idea will be to ship large quantities of cheese at once, for which you just need a health certificate for each type, to the warehouse in the Netherlands, and then EU customers can be supplied from there. That way you make it viable. The previous owner of the company, Simon Sproul, is reported to still have a stake in the business. He's going to run the British operations as before, and this is what any producer of quite a lot of goods needs to do to adapt to Brexit, really. You either move some or all of your business to the EU if you want to supply the European market. This is the reality of the situation. And because British businesses are having to make these moves. So what you're talking about, doesn't matter how much of your business you move to the Netherlands or Belgium or Ireland or whatever. What you're doing is you're talking about jobs going to other countries. If you move part of your operations to the Netherlands, you don't need so many workers in your British base. So there's jobs lost there, and you're creating jobs elsewhere. And because the EU sales have been managed from the EU, no longer the UK, taxes are levied by other countries. Cheshire Cheese Company. So let's say they were selling some cheese to a customer in, say, France. Okay. I'm sick of all this camembert. I want a good Stilton. I understand. So you sell your Stilton. I don't know whether they sell Stilton, but let's say. I guess they sell Cheshire cheese, at least as that. But they sell some cheese to this customer in France. So they made a profit on it. But they've done it from the UK. So that's part of their profits that they send to HMRC, and HMRC, well, we'll tax that now. Whereas now, because those sales are going to be managed from the Netherlands, the taxes raised on those profits will go to the Dutch Treasury. As the government prepare to announce tax rises and spending cuts, which they say they need to fill a hole in the finances. a hole they put there, by the way, it should be remembered that the extreme Tory Brexit is losing us a fortune in taxes as profits are squeezed due to expensive red tape, which just lowers the overall level of profit, even if your business does stay in this country, or because those profits are actively moved abroad. You know, tomorrow's announcement will be a Brexit budget, and every budget from now on, because there's a hole in our tax revenues caused by the loss of taxes on profits as a direct result of leaving the single market. Not an indirect result, not an unrelated thing, direct result of leaving the single market. If we were still in the single market, businesses in this country could continue to supply EU customers easily and without all the expensive red tape. Make more profit, more money going to HMRC. And you may think, well, isn't the reverse happening to balance it out a little bit? Aren't there businesses in the EU that have to move some or all of their operations to the UK in order to keep supplying the British market? No, and for two reasons. The first is that Brexit caused EU businesses to lose customers in Britain. Britain is one part, the biggest part, but one part of a single nation, the UK, because it's not an issue for Northern Ireland. But it caused British businesses to lose customers on the entire continent, everywhere, apart from Belarus, you know, bar that one little bit of a single nation, well, one big bit of a single nation. So there would be proportionally less benefit in moving part of your business from the EU to Britain, unless you had a massive amount of sales in Britain that had been lost from Brexit. Then you might, but that doesn't seem to be happening. You know, I would guess the Daily Express and Daily Mail would have been right onto it if someone had done that. But second, and possibly the reason for this, the trade barriers erected by Brexit are not mirrored. They should be. They should be. You know, the import controls that Britain applies to the EU should be equal to the ones that the EU applies to us. But they're not. We have a customs control system, although it took a year to come online, but it's there now. But there's not many checks take place. So if what's in the box doesn't match the description of what's in the declaration, you know, if someone's going, well, I don't fancy paying a load of import duties, I know, I'll lie about what's in the box. Well, the chance of someone noticing it is quite low. There is a chance, but it is quite low. So loads of smuggling going on. And there's no standards controls at all. They just don't exist. And the reason for this is because Britain can't afford to do without the EU imports, especially of food and medicines. Jacob Rees-Mogg basically said as much. He cited that as his reason for indefinitely postponing standards controls. The upshot of this is, yes, Brexit's a pain in the arse for all businesses trading across the Brexit borders right now, but it's way easier to export from the EU to Britain than it is from Britain to the EU. Even if we did build our border controls up, there would still remain a fairly easy route via Ireland for some businesses anyway. You know, it's why we're not realistically going to be able to do very much outside the single market. Yes, our trading cooperation agreement is poor. It's very poor. That's because we rushed it, just like we did the Australia trade agreement, just like we did with all of them. It was rushed, which gave the other side, which was not in a rush, the opportunity to gain more advantage for themselves. Labour say they want to improve the deal. They can improve the trading arrangements. Alignment of standards, veterinary agreements, security deal, mutual recognition of qualifications. They're all policies that Labour have backed. They will improve things. They've even promised a small freedom, they're saying no to freedom of movement, but there is actually a policy for a little bit of freedom of movement, like a deal for performers and other workers who need to travel around Europe. Now, I don't know what the EU think of that. Sounds like cherry picking to me. I know Labour are in talks with the EU over these moves, so I don't know. But all of those things can absolutely improve trade, definitely. But they would be separate bilateral agreements. It's not actually improving the trade and cooperation agreement. Improving the actual agreement is tricky. Yes, it sort of comes up for renegotiation in 2026. Yes. But how do we tempt them to improve it? Like, the way a trade agreement works is you ask for enhanced access to their market in return for conceding more access into your own market. The larger market has to concede less, of course. So we're immediately on the back foot there. But what do we have to offer? Our customs controls is basically an honesty box, and we've got no standards controls at all. Why would the EU grant better access to the single market when we can't grant them better access to the British market than they've already got? This is also the issue with all trade deals, by the way. When we're negotiating the trade and cooperation agreement, there was an understanding that we would be applying import controls at the time. They were going to be delayed, but we're going to apply them. Now it's clear we're not. We're not. So we're actually in an even weaker position than we were before. The EU already have relatively easy access to our market because we're not applying proper border controls. So the only way to increase our leverage is to put proper border controls in place. But Labour can't do that, can they? Like, if we tighten these border controls, let's say we do it quickly. Well, we're going to slow down the flow of imports. Nice one. Food and medicine shortages. Brilliant. That'll be the best way to win the next election. So then we say, okay, well, let's manage the process more slowly. Let's just build it up at the rate we can manage it. Okay. That'll cost a lot of money and you'll do it over a long time. So you won't get any benefit. You do it to avoid bringing imports to a grinding halt. Problem is then it takes too long. And Labour are back out of office before we see the benefits. The Tories then get the benefits of that investment. Now, we can get some easy wins after the next election, but the long-term plan is rejoining the single market. It has to be. Can't manage outside. I'm sure you'll have heard more news this week that France has overtaken the UK for the largest trade in European stocks now. Yes, the City of London as a whole is still the big kid on the block, but it keeps losing its number one position on various elements to other European centres. Brexiteers always knew that our trade in goods would be buggered with Brexit. They just lied about that. But there were some of them that genuinely thought that financial services would compensate. Problem is they don't seem to have a plan for doing that. So even that's failing. I've yet to see anyone plot a long-term plan for the UK that actually keeps us out of the single market. So the only thing that makes any sense is rejoining. There is no other plan. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to join the channel, support the channel further, join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.